Thank you for tuning into the Forward Together podcast, an extension of Forward Summit, where we bring Indigenous communities together with Canadian industry leaders to spark meaningful conversations. We host some of the most inspiring voices and powerful leaders you'll hear anywhere. And now, those conversations continue year-round, right here on the podcast. I'm your host, Rod Miller, and I have the privilege of sitting down with these incredible guests, sharing their teachings, their stories, and their vision for advancing Indigenous prosperity and building a stronger Canadian economy for all. This is the Forward Together podcast, because the path to a stronger Canada is one we walk together. Let's get started. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Forward Together podcast. I'm Rod. I get to be your host today. I'm the president and chief operating officer of the Connect Partnership Group, and it is just a thrill to have this person with me today. I met this guest back in Forward on West Coast last year, and I couldn't wait to speak to him, and I'm so glad he's with us today. Dean Montgomery is the CEO of Indigenous Initiatives Inc, the president of Sunspear Renewables, and the co-founder of Bears Lair TV, and also a citizen of the Métis Nation. And so, Dean, it's just a thrill to have you today. Thank you so much for joining us on the Forward Together podcast.
Well, thanks, Rod. No, it's great to see you, and thanks for having me on. A pleasure. I'm very excited.
And I have to say, I love your background. I was thinking it's not a virtual background; it is a real life car.
It is. I could pull it.
Literally on vacation doing this podcast, and I can't tell you how much appreciate that you were taking the time today to join us. The first question I wanted to ask you, and I'm curious about this because I share a very similar background. I'm Métis as well, a Cree descent out of Alberta in the Red River Nation in Manitoba. How does your cultural background inform you on your approach to building those bridges between Indigenous communities and the work that you do and corporate Canada? Because I imagine there's a lot of kind of Métis tradition that you would tap into. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for asking that. And I'm really fortunate. I have some pretty amazing parents and grandparents. So, from my Métis side, which is my Cree side, at that time with my grandfather, he always says he was born to a Cree princess. And this is in Waskasiu, near Lac Orange. Yeah. And so he was always very proud of his heritage. And, he's one of these guys who's very charismatic, interesting, a great athlete. And he got some support along the way. And he went to the University of Saskatchewan in about 1930. And as an Indigenous person back there, that was very rare. And I believe he was one of the first engineers to ever graduate from there who was Indigenous. So, he said that it was difficult at the time. There was, he looked very Indigenous compared to how I do now as a result of my mixed heritage. But he said it was tough, but he made it through, and he actually went into the Navy right away. And he was an engineer in the Navy. So he had a lot of pride in that. My dad was an academic as a result, his choice was geology and history. And so along the way of his life, it was his hobby, it was his passion, and he connected with people to write about it. He was an expert actually in Champlain and Huronia and first when there was first contact in that region. And he's written quite a bit about it. I was lucky enough to grow up reading about it. And then here I am today. We're in the Muskokas. We call it our own res as we were kids, and we're still, it's gone through the generations. My grandpa and dad aren't here anymore, but, the whole family is here, and, just really lucky. And, as I move forward in my career, it was just important to me, and all of my family has taken a lot of pride in it. So I think it naturally, really moved into becoming what I want to do for a living, which was be an entrepreneur. Yeah.
I can't wait to get into some of the initiatives that you're working on. But I want to take a kind of reflection back. You've been in this sector of Indigenous economic and business development for a long time. I'm not going to say the number of years, but because I always resist that when people ask me years. I'm like, well, just look at my hair, and that'll tell you how many years it's been. Unlike you. How has the landscape changed over that period of time? And I think importantly, as we look forward, what are we starting to see as emerging economic opportunities for Indigenous peoples and their economic sovereignty? What could you share with our listeners around that topic?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, to start off, it's just drastic. The change is absolutely drastic. And I honestly can't believe we are where we are now as Indigenous people compared to 5 years ago, never mind, 25 years ago. So, When I first started getting into the space, it was a little bit by accident, and I was an entrepreneur, and I was actually, I took myself very seriously. I started off with a surfing company in Tofino, right? So, and
Dude, you're living my dream, man. That's living my dream.
yeah, I started a tour company
Wow.
and a summer surf camp for kids to learn how to surf. And in Canada, it almost didn't exist, and
Yeah.
I had to get some permits from the park, and I thought, great, I was 23. I'm like, what do I do? But naturally for me, I just went to the nations that are there, and of course, in that region, it's all very culturally aware
Yeah.
and traditional territory. So I went and got involved, and the nations just said, yeah, you know what? Yeah, please come and use the territory. And I ended up getting a permit as well from Canada. I mean, but people didn't expect it, and as that company grew, and it was still very small communities that we're
Yeah.
from. There's not a lot of people to find, that can
Hmm.
live there, or the housing
Hmm.
or anything like that. So it was really natural. I was just friends with one of the chiefs at the time in Ucluelet. People started hiring people because they're good people. For me, it was natural because my family never thought about it. And eventually I started up a larger business in Port Alberni, which was a franchise. I had to hire about 100 people at once. So where do you
Hmm.
find 100 people at once to start off in a company? And for me, it was really easy. I just went to the reserve. There's a lot of people that were like, "This sounds great." There's wasn't a lot of barriers for me to do that, and it went really well. So yeah, I was. But back then, again, there wasn't even the word inclusion, right? We didn't
Right.
say, "Are you being inclusive?" It was just like, "Oh, you're hiring the locals or the natives or whatever the terminology was, the Aboriginals at that time." So that's where it kind of started, and I just enjoyed it. Took it a long way. Had staff retention for a long time, and as I did it, there was other things I wanted to do in my life. I just didn't want to
Hmm.
do those things and be in the surfing industry anymore. I wanted to grow. Went to some I guess some more interesting places where I could have a little more impact, and started working with some national charities like Right to Play, and doing some other initiatives that were larger that really brought First Nations into the business world.
I'm really curious about the organization Indigenous Initiatives, and I kind of look at it. So we're here described as being dedicated to fostering Indigenous economic sovereignty. I'd love to know more, and I know the listeners would as well too. Is tell us more about Indigenous Initiatives, the work that you're doing there, and the work around that economic sovereignty conversation, because we hear that a lot within our Indigenous communities. Is that economic sovereignty? Tell us all about Indigenous Initiatives.
Yeah, so it was a company that I started with my incredible wife. Her name's Gina Jackson Montgomery, and she's quite well known in our industry, and probably one of the more entertaining and interesting people you're going to meet. There's a lot of personality. She's someone you can't
No, really? You don't think
slow
so?
down. So yeah, so we met along the way, and before she was my wife, and we had really decided that there's gaps, and she
Mm,
was an economic development officer for the Squamish Nation, and I was working with industry in the energy sector with a company
hmm.
called Alltech, and Quanta group of companies. There's engineering, there's all sorts of different things, power lines, generation. And everywhere I go, involved in the energy sector, there was like, well, how do we get people more involved in this and that? And
Mm,
how do we come up with funding to get involved? What does this look like? BC Hydro, I was working with a lot of utilities across the country. She said, look, I'm party of one. I'm an ec dev officer. I sit and I represent the nation. I don't understand exactly what you're doing, on
hmm.
your side of it. So how do we do that? And she goes, I don't have enough help. I need the
Mm,
resources. We don't have the cash. We don't have access. I can't write grants by myself.
yeah.
I need the expertise, and we need all these. So that's where Indigenous Initiatives came from. And really it started off as strategic planning, working with nations, and then
Mm,
really getting access to funding to really support the nations. So we turned Indigenous Initiatives into our organization where, we sit down, we understand what the nation's needs are. We do community engagement to see what the whole community wants.
hmm.
Try to work as best we can with council, work with their policy, work with their governance, and really start, working away on where they need to be. And it's different. Every nation is different.
I was gonna say, I imagine that every nation has their own kind of needs and wants and requirements. So what are some of the challenges that you face? Because I know, speaking to my own connections around this topic, it is the access of grants, it's the access of funding, it's the access of knowledge on how to do all these things and where do I start and where do I begin? What are some of the challenges that you've been able to help address for the nations that you've worked with under Indigenous initiatives?
Yeah, it really starts off with making sure you have a strategic plan
Hmm.
and understanding what your own history is as a nation.
Hmm.
And a lot of times when you're applying for trying to access the capital, whether it's from Indigenous Services Canada or some of the amazing other companies that are out there, like the New Relationship Trust, or even a traditional bank for financing, is it's really hard to get going if you don't have a financial history or a track
Yeah.
record or anything like that. So we really want to look back, try to find out what we can, see what they've applied for already. But at the end of the day, it's leadership that takes place. We see that everywhere we go, from working on the level of trying to get funding or work on projects and try to get them involved in an equity position, to just doing a kids camp, right? Understanding that, there's different cultures in every nation, really based on um, support they've had before from their leadership. But so I'd say, having great leadership is really critical, and we try to work with that by doing the kids camps.
And I'm going to get to that in a second because I think that is kind of one of the coolest things. So I'm going to make our listeners just kind of hold on until we talk about the kids camps. But I do want to talk about Sunspear Renewables. And I think the premise behind Sunspear is that you're advancing clean energy solutions for those indigenous communities. And, this, I've had many conversations with nations who look for food sovereignty, who look for energy sovereignty, being able to make sure they can stand on their own. Tell us about Sunspear. What's the premise behind that? What kind of impact are you having? What are the nations seeing as the benefit of working with you with Sunspear Renewables?
Yeah. No, thanks for asking. Yeah, Sunspear came out about this. We're about 10 years old now, working with nations so that they can get more involved. And I was working in the power sector. A lot of it we were doing was all these transmission lines and distribution
Mm,
lines going through traditional territory, and the nations are like, what the hell? How can we
yeah,
have nothing to do with this? And why is it going through? We all know the story. There's been there still is a lot of problems going on. But we started saying, the nation said, well, why can't we have our own generation? Right? Why can't we sell
yeah.
to you? Why is there a monopoly? And we said, well, we can, and there's different ways to start off. And there have been these programs where we could get funding. And our whole premise is that we will sit down with you, no cash up front. We'll access the cash, we'll access the capital, and you're going to own this, right? Whether it's going to be, residential solar
Hmm.
or residential roof. And we've had a lot of success with that. We've worked with, I don't even know, 20 communities now where they have rooftop solar. But not only do you
Cool.
have low cost energy, but you start taking control of your own energy, right? Which does lots of different things. If you're controlling your own energy, you have those costs. You can put it toward that money towards healthcare, right? You can put it towards education. You can put it towards housing and all the things that we need as Indigenous people and within the communities. So that's been our motive. Along with that, we do a lot of capacity building. Most of the crews we have are Indigenous. If they're in the community, we'll always train anyone that wants to be trained, get them involved. And, we've had examples now, like with the Soto First Nation, where, we have 160 homes that have rooftop solar. We started with, I think we had 17 the first year. Now, we've gone through phase 5. We have about 160, and we're getting battery storage on that as well. So, this nation is literally independent. They're right beside Site C, where they're a huge
Yeah.
role in that. It's really interesting the way things are turning, but I think it really does go back to, energy is such a huge part of our society. It's what trade comes from, nationally and internationally.
Yeah, and it really speaks to the concept of self-determination too, right? Where you're not relying upon somebody else. I know there's so many nations that rely upon, even nations here around Calgary that rely upon agreements with the city to deliver services to the nation. And you think about what comes with that self-determination is the opportunity to make choices on where you can put the resources that you have access to. So it's an absolute, so is that a Canada-wide organization, Sunspear? Or are you kind of more focused in BC or the West or Western Canada? Where's your operations?
Yeah, no, so we do a lot of the residential here in BC. We
Hmm.
know the funding. They've been terrific to work with. The funders, can't say enough about them. BC Hydro has some great rebates going on. But we have some utility scale projects happening in other provinces that are wind and solar as well. We're looking somewhere anywhere above 15 megawatts, sometimes 40 megawatts. So we have other projects. I can't really mention which ones they are at the
No, of
moment,
course, yeah. No, of course, yeah.
yeah, no, we're right across the country. And again, Gene and I work with utilities, all the way from, from Ontario Power Generation, Sask Power, pretty much. It's been a long time. So yeah, we've gotten to know a lot of the players, and, man, the steps that industry is taking, and the way that say Forward Summit brings people together, it's no wonder why it's moving so fast right now. It's like I said, 5 years ago, I just can't believe some of the projects, the ownership and the equity stakes that all these nations have in all these energy projects or
Yeah,
housing for all.
it really, to me, it's like a number of the barriers that were in place have been lifted or they've been eased. And I think that's really helping. And I don't know the number, I can't remember the number, how much the Indigenous economy is going to contribute to the GDP of Canada, but it is such a significant growth opportunity for us as a nation. It's wonderful to see the kind of work you're doing around this, particularly when you say capacity building. When I was working at a post-secondary, one of my teams there, we did a lot of capacity building on site within nations around the trades, and I always felt that that was legacy work because we're not just getting you involved in some type of partnership that's going to fund you. We're actually building your community with skills and competencies that are going to help you continue to contribute to the economy going forward. So great work on that. I'm curious though, how does one go from that, like these companies that you're building, to the Bears Lair TV? And you launched this TV show, you and Gina, that's focused on a kind of a Dragon's Den model. How did that all come about to get that off the ground?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, that's really, Gina's amazing idea. I was there to support it where I could, and had a few ideas of my own, but honestly, it was just conversation. And she was saying, why isn't we were watching Dragon's Den or Shark
Yeah,
Tank? She goes, why isn't there this for Indigenous people? When she was with the Squamish Nation, she was working with all their entrepreneurs, and she was running their trust for that, to so that entrepreneurs could access funding, and she thought it was a great idea, and she brought it up to me over and over again. And one night, I just said, let's stop talking about it. Just let's go pitch it. And of course, only Gina could do it. She pitched it, and they said, I think she went to APTN, and they said, well, this is a great idea, but you're going to need, a degree in broadcast journalism. And she reached over and literally blew off her degree in broadcast journalism that she took 20 years later. Right. And so, that was the concept of that. And I
yeah,
participated in that for sure. But I mean, it's give her all the credit. And, the perseverance, that was a lot of money that had to be raised. It was self-funded, right? There was no grant funding for that, as it was
yeah,
considered prize money. So there's lots of neat story behind that. And then, to turn into the kids camp, that was really easy for me. I mean, for me, I was, I was a camper. I was a counselor in training. I was a counselor, as a director. I opened my first own kids camp. So,
yeah.
when she came up with that idea, I was like, yeah, I'm in. I've done it my whole life. So it's, working with kids, and we have 4 kids of our own. It's
So
it's fulfilling.
what was it like? So you have this idea, you want to pitch this show, and you go to the network and you pitch it, and they say, yeah, it's a great idea, but you got to fund it. What was that
Yeah.
like? Because that to me is like, okay, now I got to go to corporations and whatever to. What was that like for you both to get out there and start pitching that to get that initial round of funding to get it off the ground?
Yeah. That was exciting, to be honest with you. You know what?
Hmm.
We'd been again in this industry for a long time and met people along the way. And, I think one thing when you know our industry, like yourself, is, there's people that show up because they're interested. And then there's people they're in it for the long run. And the
Yeah.
friendships we have, and the people with these big companies, we know who they are, right? They're committed, and we commit to each other like you do to any friend. So, it's not easy. It was a lot of money. Again, I'd make a few calls, but, if Gina's pitching something to you, you're probably going to buy it.
Well, what is that?
So,
20, was it 20 years of ECDev development, business development? So she has all this background around, economic development. So of course she's going to be able to, plus the journalism and the history that she brought with that. Of course she's going to be the best pitcher. I mean, she could probably do a master class on how to pitch, I would imagine, both you together and how to pitch.
yeah, I mean, just her customer service. She was in the service industry her whole life,
Yeah.
paying for herself to go through school. I mean, Gina, in relating to people, is Yeah, it's 1-on-1. So, and I enjoy it, right? So I'm
Yeah.
glad. Well, I feel lucky to be a part of it. So it's nice.
Tell me, tell me about the impact on youth, because I look at this and I think about, you know, the traditional model of it for many youth is they graduate high school, they go to some post-secondary, or they go to a trade school or a college or whatever, and they kind of follow this traditional path, not really knowing what they're going to be doing with their lives, right? When they're so young. But you've given youth such an opportunity to hone skills, to get connected, to be in community, and to learn about entrepreneurialism with those entrepreneur camps. That must just bring you. The only word I can think of is bring you both a lot of joy to be in a position to have that kind of impact.
Yeah, I mean it's incredibly fulfilling. You know, if you ever reach one child and can help them out, it means a lot. And I've had, working with a lot of great not for profits, specifically based around kids. I've had very touching and moving and sad times.
Yeah.
The really neat thing about the entrepreneur camp is that, it's not based around trauma, right? This is something where you can
Mm-hmm.
just be hopeful, right? And you don't
Mm-hmm.
really get into the sad stories or anything like that. And we know they exist in our communities. So, anytime you can say, look, this is an idea, and the things you can do, like just share, just talk, right? Speak, you're in a safe place, learn how to shake a hand, right? You matter. And I think that's the main thing is that, after 4 days of spending time together, I think no matter what the age group is, because there's a variance. Sometimes it's 11 or 10, with an 18-year-old, and they have the same
Mm-hmm.
interest. And you don't really see the age, right? The age
Mm-hmm.
passes. People say that I learned to speak. So, it's been really exciting. We look to continue to grow it. Any support we can get, we'd love it. And, we have, amazing sponsors and amazing people like yourself who, keep sharing it. The kids are our future, right? We always say that. And I think the other thing too is that, the world's different now. The way you access education is different. I've learned a lot from my own kids where, they had all the opportunity to do whatever they want. And, they got into all the universities. And I said, Reed, what school are you going to? And he just said, I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I'm going to go do what I want to do. And I might go back, but right now, this is what I'm interested in. And that's what I'm passionate about. And I was like, you know what? That's fantastic. Good. I'm glad you think that. Schools are businesses too. So
Yeah.
you can look at it any way you like. So I like it. But, to see it actually tangible and see kids starting to do things and we try to support them and be a little bit of an incubator
Yeah.
with their businesses, right? It's pretty cool.
So my question is centered around, from your perspective and all the work that you've done, both from an entrepreneur lens, but also working with youth entrepreneur education. Why is that important? I want to read our listeners to understand the connection between youth entrepreneur education and Indigenous economic development. How do those two go hand in hand?
No, that's a great question. And one thing that we always see is, in every community we go to, because we ask the kids, like, what business would you want to start? And these are viable businesses, by the way. Like, these kids come up with incredible ideas, but almost every single one of them comes up with a business that will support their community. And it's moving, it's touching. A lot of the kids that we work with, have never been off reserve. Right. And
Yeah.
it's what they want to know, and they want to stay on reserve. So when you start building these businesses, we start looking at clean tech and digital services that are coming out, and all the amazing people that we know involved in, like the Bobby Ressettes, to
Mm-hmm.
Ryan
Mm-hmm.
St. Germain's
Yeah.
and Josh and all these incredible people who are leaders in tech. And then, Indigenous initiatives, we're working with quite a few like telecom providers to start getting fiber into these communities. And people don't have to leave. They're getting big salaries, or good salaries at least, to live in community. And so when you start building economies around that for services
Right.
beyond that, it changes the idea. And, you can be who you want to. You can do whatever you want. I think the main thing is that we all need is hope and a dream.
Mhm.
Seeing kids believe that is amazing.
Well, I got to tell you, I've spoken to a few individuals who've been involved in the kids camps, and they, as entrepreneurs, come back and they're inspired by those kids, and that's a wonderful, amazing, incredible impact to have. So congratulations to you both on the Bears Lair, as well as the youth camps and the podcast and all that. I have a
Yeah.
question as we kind of come to the wrap up here pretty quick. Is I want to ask you from a broader perspective, looking at Canada, the broader landscape of Indigenous economic development, what do you see as the role Indigenous-led companies play in advancing economic reconciliation and self-determination? What important role do they play there?
Yeah, I think it's the leadership role. And I honestly, we're seeing major projects now where honestly you'll have where First Nations or direct dev companies or just even private corporations, have more experience now in leading partnerships, and equity positions than industry does or lawyers have. All right. So, you can start looking at, I won't name them, but we know some of the bigger projects, up in Haisla, right? In the Montagnes and these projects. And I think people are going to start, in corporations, they come to us, they ask, how do we get involved working with Indigenous communities and where does it start? And for those corporations, it starts internally and taking a good look at yourself, right? And then like anyone else, go get experience, right? Go talk to people that know what they're doing. And to me, these are the Indigenous companies that are successful, right? So I think right now, there's a little bit of shift in the landscape where, these awesome corporations, Canadian corporations, sometimes international corporations, are going to Indigenous companies and saying, how do we do this? Right? We know that we're going to have, I'd say, let's just say permission from the nations to do it. And so many of these resource and energy projects that that's probably the best way to start. And it's like anything. People said, well, how did you start off with your career and creating inclusion? And I said, that was easy. I just went and asked.
Right.
That's it. So let's learn, let's share information, go to the Forward Summit. You're going to meet a ton of smart people, right? That have done this for a long time, and like I said, with everything that we do in life, whether if it's, the kids camps or, anyone, no one's ever done it alone. Like we have an incredible team. You have an incredible team, and that's what it takes. So let's share information. Let's give a lot of love. Let's care about what we're doing. Let's be empathetic towards everyone involved, and it's amazing what we can accomplish together.
Well said, Dean. So if a corporation was listening to this podcast and they don't have an Indigenous relations department, they don't know where to start, what would you say to them is the most important foundational stone that they can put in place to begin that relationship? What would you say to that corporation is absolutely critical?
Yeah, I think it's what we'd say to ourselves in any relationship, whether it's just your family, your friend, or your marriage is, what are your values? Just check what your values are. What do they match? Where do you want to be? I think whenever we do value-based decision making, we're probably going down the right track. And recognizing that, when you are doing this, is that what are you willing to give?
Yeah.
If you can answer that with honesty, and if you want to take the lead, then I think you have a good opportunity in doing it, and it's an investment. But I guarantee you, it's going to pay off in multiple different ways.
Beautiful. So my last question for you, Dean, is a visual one. So imagine you're sitting on the beaches of Tofino and you've got your surfboard ready to go, and it's 5 years into the future. What do you have hope to have accomplished with Indigenous Initiatives and the other organizations that you lead, and the Bears Lair and the camps? What do you hope to look back on saying, yeah, we did this? What would that be?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what we're doing. I'd really like to see the Bears Lair in every community, and the communities are, it's just there. It's available. It's a resource that can be used, and we can be proud of that. And we want to see, tangible results from the youth that are taking it, right? Let's see some businesses come out of that. As far as, when we started Sunspear, we actually called it Sunspear Microgrid. And the whole goal was that every nation could create their own grid, microgrids, and we're getting there. They're going to be their own energy providers. That's great. But, as much as anything is let's continue educating. Let's get these communities, so much talent in all of them. There's such great leadership. Let's keep building on that. And, I don't know. I don't plan on sailing off into the sunset anytime soon. So, all right, I'll just keep learning in the meantime.
Amazing. Dean, I want to take a minute. I know that you were on vacation or on vacation right now. I wanted to just take a moment to thank you for taking the time out to be here, to be part of this Forward Together podcast, for sharing your insights and your wisdom and your experience. I am inspired by the work that you're doing and the work that Gina's doing around the youth and the entrepreneurship work, the podcast, all that stuff. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been such a thrill, and I hope you have an amazing time on your vacation to Italy, and enjoy Rome, but most importantly, enjoy the wine out of Tuscany, because it's incredible. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Rod. I appreciate it. And thank you and your amazing organization as well.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on the Forward Together podcast. These conversations share the voices, stories, and teachings that are shaping Indigenous prosperity and strengthening Canada's economy. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if your company would like to support and amplify these important conversations, connect with our media partner, the Davis Media Company, publisher of Forward Magazine, to explore sponsorship opportunities. And of course, the best way to experience these conversations is in person. Join us at Forward Summit, where Indigenous communities and industry leaders come together to build relationships, share knowledge, and create lasting partnerships. It's an incredible opportunity to learn, to listen, and to be part of Canada's journey toward a stronger, more inclusive economy. Let's keep listening, learning, and walking this path forward together.